My name is Gabrielle Tillenberg, and I'm the exhibitions coordinator at Strathmore. So I help mount exhibitions and have had large involvement with the Invitational Gallery, which is where Mandi Moerland's work is. And we started off in the Invitational Gallery with a goal to bring younger emerging artists to the space, but have since kind of adjusted that. We've reprogrammed. The younger emerging artists are becoming a couple group shows throughout the year. And now in the Invitational Gallery, we realized that the space was really conducive to offering a moment of sort of like respite, a break from the rest of the building. We have seating in the space where you can lounge and perhaps look a little bit slower at the artwork. And Mandi Moerland is someone who we have worked with before. She was involved with an exhibition called Rise Up, which was done with the National Association of Women Artists. And she also participated in our fundraiser, Drawing for Art. And we were really impressed with the quality of her work. And so she had reached out to me and told me about some ink paintings that she was working on. And I was really intrigued at the idea of bringing in these ink paintings because they're centered around dance. And I felt that in that space, looking at paintings that captured the movement and beauty of dance would be just an interesting moment in our space to appreciate the beauty of that. You know, we tend to look for art in that space that really uplifts people and gives them something sort of to feed the soul, if you will. And it was also such a wonderful pairing with some of the other programming that happens at Strathmore. You know, we bring in dance companies, and then we have a partnership with City Dance as well. So her exhibition is called Shake It Out. So slightly inspired by, sorry, I'm just admitting someone
Florence
in here.
and the Machine.
Slightly inspired by Florence in the Machine. There's a song called Shake It Out, which is so much about freeing oneself. So and that's what I read in her work and sort of the energy that it was bringing to the room. So Mandi, could you talk a little bit about how you came to your art practice, and then we can take a look at the exhibition itself.
Sure. Well, I was a dancer from age 2 to 40, which makes me 41. I'm joking, but anyway, bottom line is I was a dancer first. That was my first art form. And I've danced in lots of companies, lots of techniques, ballet, jazz, modern, and all of that. And what happened, I think, is I always had the hand to draw, but never took it quite seriously. And there was a turn in our lives where we moved and I had to kind of rearrange. And I realized that was the time. And so I delved in. I took a lot of art classes and to kind of professionalize, if you will, or educate myself about technique. And so I've been painting seriously for the last 9 years. And that's how that happened.
Great. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's perfect. And yeah. I think that's a really wonderful introduction to start looking at the work. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started with that.
Okay, great.
So we have, I'm just going to make my screen a little bit bigger. Great. So this is a view of our space. Obviously, we'd love to have everybody in person, but circumstances bring us here. And so, you know, we were lucky enough to sell actually a few pieces before quarantine. They're still all available. Or well, not, sorry, they're not all still available, but the rest are available. And in this space, it was really interesting to have these pieces to work with, because when you're curating a space and putting pieces on the walls and trying to create a flow of the eye within that space, there are lots of factors to consider, be it framing, composition, and color, all sorts of aspects to consider with different types of work. But in this case, my colleague Leslie Lundgren put the works together in the room, and she herself was a dancer for some time. So there was another element to consider, which was the actual dance moves. And so Leslie made sure that from each piece, for example, here is Jazz Man 2, to the next, that you would be able, which is Jazz Out, that you as a dancer might be able to get from one position to the other within just a couple of moves. So in placing the works in the room, she was considering how the body actually might move through all of these positions. So it was a really interesting opportunity to use dance as a guiding force in just the placement of the work. Mandi, there's a lot of pieces in this show that are inspired by jazz. Can you talk about jazz dancing and sort of the different forms that brings on in the artwork?
You know, I'm inspired by all of it. I think what I love about jazz is the juxtapose and there's the looseness. And I say looseness because actually the dancer is very in charge and very clear about where their feet are and where their balance is. So it appears to be loose, but it's almost harder in a way to be able to do the loose and be that muscular and grounded. So for example, I know we've talked about this piece, but there's definitely, if you were to take a rod, you could find the balance. And it is a moment that happens. It's not like you hold the pose, but it's that one moment where you are literally on balance with your toes. And the rest of you can kind of follow. So there's a flow, if you will. And that's, I think what was my hope in this piece was that you could sense that you're almost coming off your balance, but you're not there yet. You're clearly grounded. So it's a dichotomy.
This is so my chance to use our lovely annotation tools. So yeah, you look at, right? I got it.
Oh, you got it.
I got it. So, I just drew this line here to show, I mean,
yeah.
It's interesting to think about that and how the body balances. And we talked about the line being so important. And I think so many times, specifically in drawings, in this case, they are paintings with Sumi ink, which we'll get to in a second. But
right.
I think it's really interesting to think about how particularly capturing dance is a challenge to the perspective of the body, but how being a dancer probably serves your ability to do that, because that is one of the most difficult things that an artist can do. I mean, it's a lifetime learning process of capturing the body with the right perspective and the right proportion. And you're doing that, but also capturing that in motion. So I'm sure that you have a lot of experience being in tune with your own body, and I would assume that helps.
Yes, and what's kind of interesting, I think, is I realize as we're looking at this, dancers spend a lot of time in the mirror, right? Like that is the way because you literally, there's a room, a wood floor, a bar, and a mirror. And you spend a lot of time looking and correcting. And so I think with this particular art form, I was trying I was looking for the energy and the chi and the spirit of the moment. And at the same time, the grounding piece of, where your body is in space. And so I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm painting. So for me, it's almost a, what would I say? It's almost a mirror. Like people say, who are these people? And in a sense, for me, it's all the places I had to go as a dancer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they're very personal to me.
Can you talk a little bit about your medium, because it is such a unique way to capture dancers? So could you talk about the qualities of Sumi ink and why you came to it?
You know, it has a little bit of a funny story, not funny, but it's kind of I was actually talking to a friend of mine, and I said, what happened was someone said, you need to get back and start drawing some more. You know, sometimes you get lost in the colors and the paint. You're like, ah, and I was not the happiest pencil person. And I just went for the brush, and I remembered this process that probably years ago. And a friend of mine in California said, Mandi, don't you remember we would buy these little kits and we would do Sumi art? And I thought, I don't know that I remembered it, but I was like, of course we did. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, the ink and the brush made sense to me. This one that you're looking at right now is a lot looser. Some of them have some pencil drawing underneath. This one is clearly totally wash and ink. The thing about the ink, which is like dance, which I want to share, is that the step happens and it's over. So with ink, you make the mark and it's over. There's no correcting in ink and Sumi. There's no erasing. Versus like an oil, you can paint over and you can do things. Sumi is immediate. So, you can all get a giggle out of this one. So I start with an image, I paint it, and then I go 2 hours more and I do the same image over and over, because that's the Sumi process of finding the energy, what's going to be the right one. And it's always the first one. So I could have saved myself 2 hours. But that's how that works. So they're fast and furious, but I do spend a lot of time with the image and look at the image and contemplate. And there's a way of coming into the moment where you pick up the brush, you take the water, and you almost, I don't know that you close your eyes, but you close your mind and you bring in that right brain, if, for better or for worse, not a good way to maybe say it. And then you just go. And then obviously there's technique involved as well. That's why you do your scales and you draw a lot, you do all of that, because the hope is that when you go for it, that it will happen. So yeah, there's a fun one over there. That's my
Yeah.
upside down yoga girl.
Yeah, and we're getting to some oil paintings too,
Yeah,
which we wanted to show in this exhibition, because you don't just work in Sumi
correct.
ink.
Yeah.
Uh, can you say, like, which did you start with? Did you start with oil paintings of dancers, or did you go to Sumi ink first?
I probably, well, having gone to school, I think I was already familiar with the acrylics and the drawing classes and the charcoals. And so I was familiar with mediums. I always enjoyed the butteriness, I guess they call it, with the oils. I feel like there's a sculptural quality with oils that I find more difficult with acrylic. So I did move into the oils, and I have been doing that for several years. The inks are about me taking a turn in the road and saying, you can only go, you've gotten this far, what else do you need to do? And so I just, and honestly, there was someone who said, this is good. And I went, we need a wall full of them. And I went, okay, I think I can do that. So sometimes there's something that somebody says and, you go, all right, I need to just get through this. And it is all about process. And I do like to share with upcoming artists and all of that, you just because you do one medium doesn't mean it's the only thing you do. In fact, they all inform each other is how it works. And that's,
Yeah, and we were talking with our kids talk this morning.
yeah.
We brought up Degas, and I kept the links open here so I can share with everyone.
Great.
I found
Yeah,
it
well,
really,
you did it.
right, we've got these. So I found this really interesting to take a look at Edgar Degas sculptures. This one is fourth position, and it has an extension that shows fourth position, comma something. But this is at the National Gallery of Art. And they have some notes on what happened when they x-rayed the piece. And I just thought that was really interesting because Mandi talked a lot about that line of balance in the body and then capturing that with the ink. And I thought it was really interesting to look at the infrastructure of Degas' sculptural work and look at the armature that he created for it, because it acts so much like that line. And even just looking at the x-ray, I was drawing so many visual parallels to your work. Of course, it's black and white, so that's part of it. But in the way that the metal is shaped, it's almost as if you're capturing those same kinds of movements and structures in your brushstroke. So I thought that was a really interesting find.
Absolutely. I think, not that I know Degas, but I've never seen this quite the way you brought it up. But I think there's when you begin to draw, there are some things called, they're like structural lines or construction lines, and you do things to kind of find the gestural energy. And my hunch would be, I did not do a lot of work in sculpture, although I find it very fascinating. My hunch would be that those lines that are there are very specific, because he was a master at knowing, right, where each line needed to be, and then could put put the armature, put the muscle on top. But I totally appreciate that. I think it's very telling about how line communicates the gesture and the energy.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also, the fact that he did do studies and paintings as well. So, while I don't want, obviously you two are very different, but I do think that in looking at dancers, it's such a fascinating way to see how that affects the eye and how that affects just the way that the artist sees the body. So, and here are just a few more within the show. I was actually interested, if I can go back to Fosse, if I'm correct, that's a particular style of dance.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
The title of this work is Fosse?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And so that's a particular style of dance. Is that correct?
Right. It is his technique. Yeah. So,
okay.
So he was a choreographer and jazz a professional dancer. So the and I think what I was working with is there are different lines you capture with ballet versus modern versus jazz, and the lines are and maybe as a dancer, I think I always if you can imagine, you're looking in the mirror and you're going, you can either do a port de bras and do this, or you can do this. But so for me, these are almost like mirror images of how do you mirror that technique. So for me, it's understanding the technique, and then obviously how does that movement energize? I know I sound a little obtuse here, but energize in the dancer, and then how do I communicate that in the painting? One of the things that's happening is that you are getting that moment where things are slightly off center, so there's obviously there's a whole process of getting to the leap. There's a whole process to getting to the jump. But what you're seeing is that moment of, I call it the aha moment. And, moving in your body is fun. And there's that feel good moment. So that is what these paintings are more about. Really finding that aha moment in the technique that I'm working with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Okay.
we've got some of your other oil paintings here.
Yes.
There's a lot on Mandi's website. If you, I'm going to add into the chat in just a second the spelling of her name so that you can look her up. She's got a website with many other images. And I also wanted to just quickly share, if you are looking for another activity, we talked a bit about Degas today, and I did find that the National Gallery of Art put together a virtual tour of his show Degas at the Opera. So if you want to look a little bit longer at some dance imagery, that's there. And I've also linked to Mandi's images, but it's also on our website at strathmore.org. I do